Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of our weekly program Double Standards, which we present to you on every Monday 7 to 8 p.m. This program is live and interactive. Having said that, you can make telephone calls and pass any comments, ask any question, or share your own viewpoints on this particular issue which we are discussing today. The telephone lines would be open just after the break, which we normally take after half an hour after starting the program. So around 7:30, 7:35, the phone lines would be open for you. So don't forget to make telephone calls and ask anything from Alan Hart. Welcome to the show, Alan, again.
Bless you.
So today we are discussing the advances of Daesh in Palmyra in Syria and Ramadi, both of these big cities of huge historical importance. They fell to the Daesh, the ISIL or IS, whatever you can call, in the last week. So ever since, over 1,500 innocent civilians, they have been butchered, and as many as 200 of them, they have been beheaded, Alan, in both places, Ramadi as well as Palmyra. So what do you think? I mean, the rampage, the Daesh, they are stopping at nothing?
Well, some people are beginning to say ISIS is winning, or asking, is ISIS winning? I think that's slightly the wrong question. The more relevant question is the US and its so-called allies failing to contain and roll back ISIS? And the answer to that is a huge, emphatic yes. They are totally failing. But hopefully we can spend just a little time explaining why the Western American-led policy is failing. First of all, no matter how obscene and brutal ISIS is, it's fundamentally an idea. And the lesson of history, the first lesson of history, is you cannot defeat ideas with bombs and bullets. Now, the Americans ought to have learned this lesson in Vietnam, which I covered as a young correspondent, but they didn't. And of course, the Israelis will never, ever learn this lesson. But the real problem with what America and others are doing is they're addressing the consequences of what I call perverted, violent Islamic fundamentalism, and not the causes. And if I may just sketch very briefly, there are two main causes of the rise of perverted, violent Islamic fundamentalism, whatever you wish to call it. One is Western foreign policy in general, and its approach to the Muslim world. We could almost say that Bush and Blair, were the best recruiting sergeants for this kind of brutality. And also there is the double standard with regard to Israel. That's the first reason, Western foreign policy. The second related reason is the corruption and the authoritarianism and the repression of Arab regimes and Muslim regimes. Now, those two things together, they generate huge amounts of Arab and Muslim hurt, anger, despair, humiliation. But those things alone don't turn Muslims into suicide bombers and fanatics of the kind who are doing the work for ISIS now. The people who do that are these clerics who are clearly bonkers, mad. But because these feelings are there, they're using the feelings. So in my view, there is no way ISIS is even going to be contained with bombs and bullets. They've got to start addressing the causes and not the consequences. And one thing they have to do is to actually come to terms with Israel and require it to live by international law and give the Palestinians a fair deal. And the other thing they've got to do, America should do, is to say to the Arab regimes, look, the days of authoritarianism and repression are gone. You've got to start moving forwards towards this thing we call democracy and give all of your people a better deal.
Wonderful. Now, we are seeing three big crises in the region. We are seeing Daesh making advances in Syria, capturing, I think now they say, more than half of the landmass of Syria. Then they're making advances and controlling almost a quarter of Iraq. Different scenarios, different causalities in both areas. And the third one is Yemen. Now, Yemen is more complex, more powers and more ideologies, more than two that are involved in Yemen. But these three issues, these three areas are intertwined. The fourth now recently has been discovered that now Saudis, they are using ISIL or Daesh towards the sectarian cleansing of Shias and avoiding the blame also. No, we are not doing it. The Saudi Defense Forces aren't doing it. They are not persecuting the Shias. It's the Daesh who is doing, the dirty people, they are doing that. Look, we are doing our best. One day we will win this war. Now, keeping these four scenarios in mind, how do you, what is your reflection on Ashton Carter's recent statement a couple of days ago, the US Secretary of Defense, when he said that the Iraqis, he used the vague term, Iraqi government and the military, they lack the will to fight this war against Daesh. What is your take on that?
Well, it made me laugh, because if you look at Iraq of old, we had there in Saddam Hussein a guy who was a Sunni, who was keeping his foot on the throat of the Shia majority, in other words, serving the Western interests. Mm-hmm. So they got rid of him. It seems to me that they're pretty bloody stupid in Washington, quite frankly. I'm not saying Saddam Hussein was a good guy, but the fact is he had his foot on the throat of the Shia. Now that he's gone, and of course the other thing that's really happened is the mistake the Americans made after the war. You remember they disbanded the army. That was absolutely crazy. I heard a comment the other day from a commentator I much admire, Abdul Bari Atwan. Uh-huh. You know of him. Yeah. And he was saying that Saddam Hussein's old Revolutionary Guard is now the driving force of ISIS. Uh-huh. That they've moved to the emotional right as well as the physical right, as it were. Mm-hmm. We've created this mess. And frankly, Ijaz, looking at the totality of the mess that the Arab world is in, and bearing in mind that Wahhabi websites in Saudi Arabia are now calling on a daily basis for the complete liquidation of Shiism. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This I find quite extraordinary, but I suppose predictable. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that it goes from catastrophe getting worse and worse unless one thing happens. Mm-hmm. The Saudis have got to come to their senses and come to some accommodation pragmatically with Iran. Mm-hmm. And Iran is open for that. Mm-hmm. But unless that happens, I see no way, it doesn't matter what the Americans do, I see no way of stopping this monster of perverted, violent...
Then how would you comment on the statement which Lord Dannett, the former Chief of General Staff, whose own tenure was cut short by 6 months after he picked up a row with Gordon Brown in 2009 and 10. And Richard Dannett, as Lord Dannett, he said something very ambitious.
He called for troops to be sent.
He called for 5,000 troops. Let's send them to Ramadi and fight Daesh.
Well, when I heard him say that on the BBC News this morning, I used a word which I couldn't use on your...
Thank you very much.
To describe him. As I said earlier, there is simply no way you defeat an idea with bullets and bombs. It's mad. If America and Britain and France and others put troops in, ISIS would say, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. That's just what we want.
Mm-hmm. So if you have to advise Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, UK's Defence Secretary, what would you say about sending the troops or sending weapons or involving Iran into it and let them lead?
I would say take a leaf out of Obama's advice, what Obama's doing. Obama's just made a strategic turn. I'm sure you've noticed it. Having been very bad towards Russia, he recently sent Kerry to Moscow to make friends again with Putin, because Obama has come to the realization that he needs both Putin and Iran if there's to be any real management of all the crises in the region. So I would say to our Foreign Secretary, go down that road. Mm-hmm. Because unless the big powers really put their act together, mm-hmm. and bring Iran into the picture, you haven't got a cat's chance in hell.
So do you think Britain still has got a role to play?
Yes, I do. But I think it should be played through the UN Security Council. Mm-hmm. Bearing in mind that I wrote an article recently, I think I mentioned it before, UN equals useless nations. Mm-hmm. I mean, that whole bloody show needs reforming. But really, look, when Syria started all those years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it could have been resolved very quickly if Obama had had a private conversation with Putin and said, what's your price for requiring Assad to stand down to make way for new elections? Mm-hmm. That could have fixed it. Mm-hmm. But Obama just wasn't smart enough, or wasn't allowed to be smart enough to do that. It is only diplomacy and mm-hmm. politics that can fix this. Mm-hmm.
I had a chat a few days ago in Tehran with a leading academic who also provides input towards strategic decision making in Tehran. And he shared with me that I asked him a question that do you think the United States can play a very active role beyond signing this nuclear pact with Iran, and can still they have the recipe to control and then later on reduce the scourge of ISIL? And he said to me that how United States can control Daesh, or let alone eliminate, when the United States has sold in the last 3 years more than $100 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia and other GCC states. So where those weapons are being used, if 10% of those weapons are used towards destroying ISIL, that can be achieved. But when Ashton Carter says Iraqi government does not have the will to fight this war against Daesh, do you think the United States has got a will, despite selling the weapons and Saudi Arabia buying the weapons? Do they have any will to control them either?
No, I don't think so. But you see, if Obama pulls off the deal with Iran, I mean, I'm willing almost to bet my life now that he will. I believe it's a done deal, and I don't think the Zionists in Congress will be able to whip up a majority to override a presidential veto. So I think that will be a done deal. Now, Obama is then at the turning point of history. He can then try to open his box even wider and take on Israel, because the significance of Palestine with regard to ISIS is simply in this. Although all Arabs everywhere have got their own problems, they care passionately about Palestine. And if an American president really took on Israel and required it to do what is necessary, that would open a whole new door in the Arab world. And that would change the politics of the situation. You see, ISIS is only going to be defeated in the end when enough Arabs and Muslims are against it. If you look at Northern Ireland, it wasn't the British Army that defeated the IRA. The IRA gave up the fighting and went for politics when the British government, 50 years too late, did the right thing. Mm-hmm. And it said to the Catholic minority, yes, you must have some rights. Mm-hmm. So it's all about politics, getting the politics right. It's not about bullets and bombs.
Now, on Friday evening, the new Saudi Foreign Minister Adil bin Jubair, who was formerly the Saudi ambassador to the United States, he and the newly appointed Deputy Foreign Minister in Tel Aviv, as very important member of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, and very pretty, very dashing, very impressive young women at the age of 36. I'm talking about Tasipi Hotivli. I mean, they had half an hour communication on the phone, openly. I mean, they cared nothing. Somebody could eavesdrop them. Somebody could do the snooping on that. They said, okay, let them have it. Let Edward Snowden and Bradley, they can take that. But we are going to talk that. And they discussed Iran out of those half an hour. Out of that time, they discussed Iran for 25 minutes. And they said that, do we have a strategy to deal with Iran after this nuclear pact is signed between P5+1 and Iran? Your reflection on that?
Well, what scares me, if the deal with Iran is done, if Netanyahu really wants to wreck it, I predict his strategy. He launches an attack on Lebanon, on Hezbollah, a very big major one, not just by air, by land, hoping that will bring in the Iranians.
Iran, yes.
That sets the whole place on fire, if the Iranians were stupid enough to allow it to happen. And then whether Obama wanted it or not, he would have to become involved. They have a wrecking ability, but will they use it? I'm not saying they will, but I can see a scenario in which they might want to. I mean, forget not this man Adelson, the casino billionaire who apparently owns the Republican Party. He's been calling for bomb Iran. But, you know, it's been a marvellous week for Israel. You know that President Obama killed off the UN nuclear business where they were trying to work the UN towards a situation to get nuclear weapons out of the region.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel objected. So Obama, covering his backside, has killed it dead.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, people think that the powerful Zionist lobby in America is losing some influence. Well, maybe it is, but it's still awesomely powerful. And that may limit whatever Obama wants to do. I'll tell you one more thing about Obama. He was a very good friend of Rashid Khalidi, very, very important Palestinian, and they used to dine together and all of that. And then when he was running for office, he said to Rashid, you realise I've got to cut you off my friendship for this now, because of who you are and your status. But he said to Rashid, don't expect too much from me in the first term, but wait until the second term. Now, I know that's a true story, and it makes me believe that Obama really wants to do the right thing, not only with Iran, but with Palestine. But will he have the guts to do it? He wants to, but will he have the guts?
But Alan, if history is any guide, about 101 years ago, a small incident, if you take the face of that incident, although there was a big history of about 40 years of certain irredentist elements in the former Ottoman Empire, Archduke Ferdinand of Sarajevo, he was killed by the Serbian Espionage Society. And that small incident, apparently small incident, that triggered the Great War. Now, certain people, they have started writing in the United States, in Britain, they start giving some clues that what if this time Mansour Hadi, the Yemeni Prime Minister, the Yemeni President who has taken refuge now in Saudi Arabia, now if he is assassinated or killed by Saudis themselves, and they put the blame on Iran, do you think any incident similar to this one or similar to this one, another person in another country, if that is assassinated, then what do you think of the Middle Eastern region in months and months to come?
Well, if you're saying to me that an Israeli game plan to try and wreck the deal after it's signed would be pulling off some stunt to blame Iran, I think that's very, very possible. I think it's highly likely. Mm-hmm. It could be what you said. It could be any number of things. You could even have half a dozen Mossad agents dressed as Iranians and speaking Farsi, doing some terrible deed somewhere. No, it's more than possible that will happen.
Mm-hmm. And what are the aftermath?
Well, there's no way that Obama
1914? Another 1914 in 2015?
There's no way that Obama wants to be drawn into a wider conflict.
Right. Now, let's come to Yemen. Very boldly, the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, he gave his own map for the negotiation, inviting all the parties in Yemen. And he had to organize that on the 28th, 3 days from now. But they have been aborted now.
It won't happen.
By circumstances.
It won't happen. The Saudis were totally ludicrous. I mean, their conditions were, Houthis, surrender. Mm-hmm. Admit you've lost, give up your weapons, withdraw. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's absolutely absurd as a starting point. Mm-hmm. You maybe want to say that across the negotiating table. I don't think the Saudis know what they're doing. I mean, for years under various kings, they've been very cautious, have they not? Super cautious. Mm-hmm. Now they're acting more like the Zionists. Mm-hmm. Unless, it's like everything, unless Iran is a party to talks about other aspects of the Middle Eastern problems, there is no hope. The Houthis have got to be involved. They've got to be at the negotiating table, and without conditions. So Saudi's conditions seem to me to be just bizarre and stupid.
Now, I would like to reiterate that this is an interactive and live program. So we will have the break in a few minutes from now, and after the break, when we come back, you would be invited to make telephone calls to ask any question from Alan Hart, or pass any comment, or you can share your own viewpoint on this issue of today with Alan Hart, with myself, and with, of course, the wider audience which is watching this program. Now, Alan, coming to Saudi Arabia, the Saudis are much more clever than they look in their jubba, than their robe, traditional robe. What I'm feeling is, just correct me if I'm wrong, that's a question you have to elaborate the answer, that they are now using Daesh as a tool to eliminate, or if we use the political term, the sectarian cleansing of the Shiites, without taking the blame that they are doing it. Daesh is doing it. So one notorious force which is already disbanded, outlawed internationally. So if that is killing the Shias, the Saudis will have them done through Daesh, and still they will save their skin. Do you think so?
Well, it was certainly true that it was Saudi money, not from government, it was private, but I think there's a general agreement among real experts that it was fundamentally Saudi money that was funding ISIS. But some reports, credible reports, say the Saudis are scaling back on that. I honestly, you used the word earlier, the Saudis are clever. I personally do not believe that's true. I've said on your program before, I was a great fan of King Faisal. I think he was the first and the last great Arab leader. But I think all of his successors, I don't think they've shown what you would call being clever. And I think the new generation under King Salman that is now setting the pace, they seem to be almost right-wing fanatics themselves. They haven't learned the lessons of history that you can't solve problems with bullets and bombs. So no, I dispute the fact that the Saudis are clever. I think they are behaving now more and more stupidly.
Okay, now we take a short break, and when we come back after the break, the telephone lines will be opened and you will be asked, you'll be invited to ask questions. So we take a short break now.